The founders' dinner was held on the old assembly floor, under trusses blackened by decades of oil heat and cigarette smoke. The company had polished the concrete, rolled out linen, and parked a 1963 Ashcroft 12 at the edge of the room like a shrine. Even from his table, Daniel Mercer could smell warm wax on the paint and the faint iron tang that never really left old buildings. He sat where operations people always sat, close enough to be thanked, far enough not to matter. Grease still lived in the seams of his knuckles, though he'd scrubbed twice before coming. His phone buzzed once in his jacket. A photo from the babysitter, Ellie asleep on the couch, one sock on, one off. A vice president with red wine in his teeth leaned over. "You ever plan on remarrying, Mercer?" A few men at the table smiled into their glasses. Daniel kept his eyes on the 12's front fender, on the straight line of reflected chandelier light. "Maybe I already did." It landed as intended. A dry little laugh, a harmless dodge, then cutlery went still farther down the table. Helena Ashcroft had looked up. She sat beneath the founder's portrait in a charcoal silk dress, back straight, expressions cool as window glass. Her fingers rested beside her untouched drink. "Then divorce her," she said. The room held. Her eyes stayed on Daniel. "You're already married to me." By the time the dinner broke, the old assembly floor had gone thin and metallic with cleanup noise. Forks in bus tubs, chair legs dragged across concrete. Men who had laughed an hour earlier now kept their eyes lowered as Daniel crossed the room. No one stopped him. Helena's office sat above the original design bay, behind a corridor lined with framed blueprints and black and white photographs of men in ties standing beside chassis bucks. The building changed as he climbed, less oil, more cedar polish and conditioned air, but the old structure still spoke through it. Pipes clicked in the walls. Steel carried every footstep. Her assistant was gone. The outer office was dark. The door to Helena's office stood open a hand's width. Daniel stepped in and found her with her back to the windows, city light caught in the glass behind her. On the credenza sat a brass lamp, a cut glass water carafe, and a long ashtray no one used anymore. Her dinner expression was gone. What remained looked older. Tired around the edges, she did not ask him to sit. Instead, she crossed to a low filing cabinet built into the paneling, unlocked the bottom drawer, and slid out a gray document wallet, softened at the corners from being handled. She placed it on the desk between them and opened it. Inside was a county seal. A stamped date, 2 signatures. His hand went still over the paper before he touched it. The hospital came back in pieces. The corridor outside pediatric surgery, fluorescent hum, coffee gone cold in a paper cup. Ellie 6 years old and burning through oxygen behind swinging doors. A rain-damp night. A social worker speaking in careful, rehearsed phrases about coverage limits and timing. Helena arriving in a wool coat over office clothes, hair half fallen loose, carrying a pen. "We signed for the policy writer," Daniel said. His own voice sounded far away. "Yes, that was temporary. It was expedient." He looked up. "You told me legal would unwind it." Helena held his gaze for a beat, then looked past him, toward the dark window. "Legal drafted it. I never filed it." The room narrowed. Below them, somewhere in the building, an old freight elevator shuddered into motion. Daniel set the certificate down with too much care, as if pressure alone could tear it. "How long?" 8 years. A muscle worked once in his jaw. "For Ellie?" he asked. "For Ellie," Helena said. Then, after a pause that tightened the air between them, "and for you." He let out a breath through his nose. Not anger yet. Worse than anger. Recalculation. "You stood up in a room full of board members and said that out loud. I said it before someone else found it." She opened another file, tax records, benefits authorizations. An internal compliance memo with red annotations. "If this surfaces uncontrolled," she said, "they will call it fraud, concealment, misuse of executive authority. They will come for your pension, your housing allowance, her coverage." Her finger rested on Ellie's name without touching it. "And they will use me to do it." Daniel stared at the certificate again, at the ink of his own name beside hers. 8 years, all that load, held by threads he thought had been cut. Helena turned the second file toward him. Not legal language this time. Internal approvals, renewal riders. Signature chains. Cost center transfers tucked into ordinary quarterly reports where no one but finance would think to look. Daniel bent over the desk lamp's circle of light. His rough thumb moved down line after line. Dependent care extension. housing stabilization waiver, pension protection classification, special allocation to heritage powertrain reclamation. He stopped there. That fund was dead, he said. It was, twice. He looked at the dates. Every year the board had cut it, somebody had fed it back under another heading: training retention, historical compliance, emissions research, museum obligations. Clean paper, different bolts carrying the same load. That's my floor, Daniel said. Helena said nothing. He kept reading. The old machine shop, the apprentice budget, tooling maintenance on equipment no modern accountant would have recognized the value of, the line bore rig for pre-war blocks, the furnace relining for Babbitt work, contract labor for hand-forming body patches on obsolete dies. Things people called sentimental when they had never watched a company lose the hands that kept its name honest. You kept all this open. You kept it alive, Helena said. I prevented men in polished shoes from calling it dead inventory. The lamp warmed the paper. Outside, wind ticked once against the glass. Daniel remembered winters when the workshop should have gone dark and didn't. Remembered purchase orders cleared at the last hour. Rent on the company duplex frozen just before it rose beyond what he could manage. Ellie's inhaler still covered after policy revisions that had gutted everyone else's dependents. He had thanked payroll, HR luck. Small clerical mercies, 8 years of hidden torque, each turn held just shy of snapping. He lifted another page. Workshop output, restoration revenue, auction figures. I never sent these upstairs. No, Helena said. I did. A few pages had photographs clipped to them. His hands over a cracked magnesium case, a valve train laid out on lint-free cloth, a 1931 straight 8 running on a test stand. Exhaust note crisp and even, after every consultant said it should be parted out. She had been watching, not in the cheap way men watched from mezzanines and called it leadership. In details, compression readings in the margins, notes on sourcing phosphor bronze bushings, a question about whether the ash frame in a coach-built coupe could be pinned and epoxied or needed a fresh rail steamed from stock. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. You read these. I read everything attached to your name. He gave the smallest shake of his head, not from disbelief now, but from the weight of it. Across the building, midnight cleaning crews moved faintly through the corridor. A vacuum whined distant and thin. On the finance floor below, a different light still burned. CFO Warren Kessler sat alone with his jacket off, sleeves folded with exactness. His desk was laid out in rows: variance report, executive authorizations, departmental exception flags. He had the habit of a man who trusted neat columns more than faces. One approval number had repeated too often. He circled it. Then another tied to benefits. Same routing path. Same final override, Ashcroft. He pulled a deeper ledger, old enough to have been archived twice, and found Mercer's division where it should have failed on paper 3 separate years ago. Instead, funds had arrived under adjacent headings, always within a day of executive review, always signed high and buried low. Kessler leaned back. The leather creaked once. On his monitor, Daniel Mercer was just an employee file. Foreman, widower, 1 dependent, no management rank. No reason for the CEO's hand to be on his numbers that often. No reason unless the reason was personal, improper, or useful. He printed the exception list and squared the edges against the desk. Back upstairs, Daniel closed the file. So this is what they'll find, he said. Helena watched him across the desk, still as drawn wire. If they look in the right place, she said, they'll find what I protected. And if they don't, her gaze cooled. They'll call it favoritism, she said. Men like Kessler always do when they can't understand load-bearing work, unless it comes with their own signature on it. The board review landed on the calendar like a dropped wrench. Loud. Unavoidable, and exactly where it could do the most damage. Helena called Daniel back to her office the following Wednesday. This time she didn't sit behind her desk. She stood by the window with her arms crossed, watching the city lights smear across rain-streaked glass. Kessler requested a full compensation audit, she said. Executive tier downward. Daniel stayed near the door. That includes you. That targets me. She turned, and by extension, everything attached to my approvals. The rain picked up. Somewhere below, a loading bay door rolled shut with a low, metallic groan. The marriage, Daniel said, among other things. Helena moved to the credenza and poured water into a glass she didn't drink from. If he finds the certificate before I control the narrative, He'll frame it as concealment, misuse of fiduciary position, benefits fraud. And you want to get ahead of it. I want to survive it. She set the glass down harder than necessary. Which means you do too. Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't like the math, he understood it anyway. What are you asking? Helena turned to face him fully. In the low light, the sharp architecture of her face softened into something closer to fatigue. The board needs to see stability. Kessler needs to see nothing worth chasing. That means no sudden divorce filing. No separation paperwork that raises questions about timing. You want us to stay married. I want us to appear married. Her voice dropped half a register. Until I can bury this properly. The rain filled the silence between them. Daniel thought of Ellie, her school pickup, her inhaler refills, the health coverage that kept the bills from stacking into walls. All of it still quietly tethered to a signature he thought had dissolved years ago. For how long? 8 weeks. Maybe 10. He let out a slow breath through his nose. And what does appearing married look like to a board that's never seen us in the same room? Helena reached into a drawer and withdrew a slim leather folio. Inside was a printed schedule, dates, locations, events, founders' luncheon, Friday, regional partners' dinner, the following Tuesday, executive family brunch. End of month. Daniel scanned the list, then looked up. You want me at these. I need you at these. I don't own a suit that fits those rooms. You will by Thursday. He almost laughed. It came out dry, barely a sound. Helena watched him without blinking. This isn't charity, Daniel, and it isn't romance. It's structural. If the load shifts now, we both collapse. There it was again, her language, borrowed from his world, used to describe hers. He didn't know whether it was manipulation or understanding, maybe both. Ellie has school, he said. I can't disappear into your calendar. Then she comes. That stopped him. Helena tilted her head slightly, reading his reaction. A man's daughter at a company brunch raises no eyebrows. A man's hidden daughter raises all of them. Daniel folded the schedule closed. His thumb ran along the leather edge. And between events we maintain proximity. I attend a school function. You attend a board reception. We are seen briefly, in ways that suggest nothing dramatic and everything deliberate. That's a lot of stage management for people who barely talk. Helena's expression flickered. Loss, regret, then smoothed back into glass. We talked once, she said. In a hospital corridor. You trusted me with your daughter's life. I didn't have a choice. You had several. You chose me. The words landed heavier than she probably intended. Outside, the rain thinned to a drizzle. The city began to reappear through the glass. Tower lights, distant cranes, the slow pulse of late-night traffic crawling home. Daniel looked at the folio again, 8 weeks. He thought about torque, about tension, about holding something together that wanted to fly apart. One condition, he said. Helena waited. Ellie doesn't lie, not to anyone. She doesn't perform for your board. Agreed. And when this ends, clean papers. Filed. Final. Helena held his gaze for a long moment. Something tightened behind her eyes, invisible to anyone who hadn't learned to read machinery for stress fractures. When this ends, she said quietly, you'll have everything you need to walk away. She extended her hand. Daniel looked at it. Steady. Practiced. The same hand that had signed for his daughter's surgery while he stood paralyzed by hospital paperwork. He shook it. Her grip was firm, brief, professional. But she held on half a second longer than necessary. When Daniel left, the lamp on her desk flickered once, and the building settled around her like an old engine cooling after a long run. The first time Helena came to Daniel's house, it was raining again. She arrived in a black sedan that idled at the curb too long, as if she was reconsidering. Daniel watched from the kitchen window, dish towel over his shoulder, coffee cooling in his hand. The porch light caught the rain in silver threads. When she finally stepped out, she carried no umbrella. Just a wool coat pulled close and a small paper bag from a bakery he didn't recognize. He opened the door before she knocked. You're early. I'm never late. She stepped inside and stopped in the hallway, taking in the narrow space. The coat hooks burdened with Ellie's jackets, the boots lined unevenly beneath them, the faint smell of garlic from dinner still hanging in the air. Her gaze moved to the photograph on the wall. Sarah caught mid-law at a summer fair, Ellie a toddler on her hip. Helena looked at it for a moment too long, then handed him the bakery bag. Madeline's, she said, The girl at the counter said children like them. Daniel opened the bag. The cookies were still warm. Ellie's in her room, he said, finishing homework. I didn't come to interrupt. You came to be seen. Helena's jaw shifted slightly. I came because you asked me to understand what you're protecting. Before Daniel could answer, footsteps padded down the hallway. Ellie appeared in fleece pajamas with a book under one arm. Stopping short when she saw the visitor, she looked at Daniel, then at Helena, then back at Daniel. Is this the lady from your work? This is Ms. Ashcroft. Helena corrected quietly. She crouched slightly, bringing herself closer to Ellie's height. You must be the one who keeps your father out of trouble. Ellie considered this. He burns toast sometimes. I've seen his workshop reports. The toast doesn't surprise me. Something shifted in Ellie's face. Not quite a smile, but the architecture of one. Daniel exhaled slowly and stepped back toward the kitchen. I'll make tea. By the time he returned with 2 mugs, Ellie had pulled Helena to the couch and opened the book between them. It was an old illustrated guide to insects, dog-eared, coffee-stained on one corner, a gift from a neighbor 2 birthdays ago. Helena sat stiffly at first, coat still on, hands folded. But Ellie's voice was relentless in its softness, narrating each beetle and moth as if Helena had never seen anything with wings before. Slowly, Helena's posture loosened. Her coat came off. Her finger traced a diagram of a Luna moth's life cycle. Daniel stood in the doorway with the tea growing cold in his hands. This was not the woman from the boardroom. This was not the woman who spoke in audits and approvals. This was someone else. Someone who had been buried so long that even Helena seemed unsure how to wear her. Later, after Ellie had been tucked in and the house had gone quiet, Helena stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window at nothing. Daniel dried the last dish and set it in the rack. She has Sarah's voice, Helena said. Daniel paused. You remember Sarah? I met her once. At the company holiday party the year before she passed. She laughed too loud at a joke no one else understood. Daniel huffed softly. That was her. Helena turned. Her face was pale and unguarded in a way he hadn't seen before. I wasn't watching from a distance because it was strategic, she said. I was watching because I didn't know how else to be close. The clock above the stove ticked once. Daniel folded the towel and set it on the counter. Why didn't you just ask? Helena's gaze dropped to the sink. Because I didn't know what I wanted until it was already something I couldn't name. The house settled around them. Pipes in the walls, wind against the old window frames, the quiet breath of a sleeping child down the hall. Daniel didn't touch her, didn't move. But for the first time, the space between them didn't feel like a corridor. It felt like a room. The next morning, photos of Helena Ashcroft leaving a modest duplex in the factory district landed on a financial journalist's desk, forwarded from an anonymous internal address. By noon, the board had scheduled an emergency session. By evening, the word scandal had been typed more times than Daniel's surname. The boardroom smelled of furniture polish and recycled air. 12 chairs circled a table long enough to land a plane on, each seat filled by someone who had rehearsed their expression in the elevator. Daniel had never been inside this room. He stood just past the threshold now, holding a weathered file box that had spent 8 years in his workshop's bottom cabinet. His only suit, the one Helena had sent, charcoal, fitted, still stiff at the shoulders, felt like a costume borrowed from someone else's life. Helena sat at the far end of the table. Her posture was flawless, but her hands were flat on the wood. Fingers slightly spread, the way a person braces before a collision. Kessler stood at mid-table with a projection remote in his hand. Let me be clear about what we're discussing, he said. His voice carried the practiced calm of a man who believed the room already belonged to him. This is not a personal matter. This is a governance matter. He clicked the remote. On the wall screen, a scanned marriage certificate, Helena's signature, Daniel's signature, a county seal from 8 years ago. CEO Ashcroft has maintained a concealed marital relationship with a floor-level employee for nearly a decade, Kessler continued. During that time, significant budget protections, benefits authorizations, and departmental exceptions have flowed through her office, directly benefiting her undisclosed spouse. He clicked again, a chart. Fund allocations to heritage powertrain reclamation, line items marked in red. This is not favoritism, Kessler said. This is financial misconduct dressed in sentiment. Helena did not move. Daniel set the file box on the edge of the table. The sound was quiet, but every head turned. Kessler paused. "Mr. Mercer, you're welcome to observe. You are not on the agenda. I brought the agenda." He opened the box. Inside, workshop logbooks, restoration invoices, auction records, quarterly summaries stamped and dated, and a separate manila envelope marked medical in faded ink. Daniel laid the logbooks out first. 19 vehicles, he said. Exposed block castings, matching numbers drivetrains, coachwork authenticated to original specs. Exposed, not restored, because restoration means the part was missing. These were recovered. He pointed to the auction records. 12 of those cars sold in the last 5 years. Combined revenue, $4.7 million. Net margin to the company after costs, 2.9. Kessler's mouth opened. Daniel kept talking. "The division you flagged as a budget drain returned more per square foot than the marketing pavilion. That's public record now. Check lot 761, Amelia Island, 2022. Check Barrett-Jackson Scottsdale, 2019. These aren't journal entries. These are sales receipts." He opened the manila envelope. "This is the medical file. My daughter's, not mine. 8 years ago, she had a congenital valve defect. She was 6 years old and running out of time. The company's surgical rider didn't cover dependents of non-exempt employees. The only path to coverage was spousal extension through executive tier benefits." He placed the hospital admission form on the table. "Ms. Ashcroft offered to sign the paperwork herself. I asked if there was another way. There wasn't. So we went to the courthouse corridor outside the surgical wing and signed the only document that would keep my daughter's heart from stopping on a table." He looked directly at Kessler. "That's not fraud. That's field repair with the parts you have." One of the board members leaned forward. "And the continued marriage was her protecting me without telling me." Daniel's voice stayed level. "I didn't know the certificate was still active until last month. Every benefit I received I believed was company standard. Every approval she gave my division I thought came from someone else." He pulled one last page from the box. 6 months ago, Kessler authorized a facilities contract with an outside vendor for component storage. That vendor is a shell company registered to his brother-in-law. Here's the incorporation document. Here's the invoice trail. Here's the email where he asks an analyst to bury the line item." Kessler's expression cracked. Helena finally spoke. "I protected a man who keeps this company's legacy running," she said. Mr. Kessler protected his own wallet. The room held. Daniel closed the file box. He didn't wait to be dismissed. 3 weeks after the board meeting, Kessler's office sat empty. The nameplate had been removed, the drawers cleared, the leather chair pushed neatly beneath the desk, as if he had never occupied it at all. Legal had used words like voluntary separation and mutual agreement, but everyone on the executive floor understood the weight of the silence that followed. The company steadied itself the way old machinery does after a misfire, loss of a few rough cycles, a recalibration, then the rhythm returning cleaner than before. Daniel went back to his workshop. The light through the high windows came in at the same angle it always had, catching the dust motes above the workbenches and warming the hoods of half-finished restorations. He moved through the space slowly that first morning, running his hand along the edge of the tool rack, listening to the familiar tick and settle of the building around him. Nothing had changed here. Everything had changed outside of it. Helena didn't call, didn't visit. For 10 days, the only evidence she still existed came through interoffice channels. A funding memo with her initials, a facilities approval with her signature, the faint echo of her authority moving through paperwork he would never cease. On the 11th day, Daniel drove to the executive building after hours. Her office was lit. The door was open. She sat behind her desk with her glasses on, reading something dense and legal. When she looked up, the mask was thinner than he had ever seen it. Fatigue at the corners of her eyes, her hair pulled back without precision, the armor of her public self, left somewhere between the elevator and the hallway. Daniel stepped inside and closed the door behind him. He set a single document on her desk. Helena looked at it without touching it. Divorce filing, county header, 2 signature lines at the bottom. "I had my lawyer draw it up," Daniel said. "Clean, simple. No claims, no contest." Helena removed her glasses slowly. Her fingers rested on the frame as if she needed something to hold. You didn't have to bring it yourself. Yes, I did. She looked at the paper for a long moment. Then she reached into her drawer and withdrew a pen. The same pen, Daniel realized, that she had used in the hospital corridor 8 years ago. She uncapped it, then stopped. Why now? She asked. Daniel pulled a chair from the wall and sat across from her, close enough to see the faint tremor in her hand. Because you never took this for yourself, he said. You held on to it for Ellie, for the shop, for reasons you never said out loud, but you never once asked what you wanted. Helena's jaw tightened. I don't have the luxury of wanting. You did once, in my kitchen, when you talked about watching from a distance because you didn't know how else to be close. She said nothing. Daniel leaned forward. Sign it, he said, and then if you want we start over. No certificate, no board pressure, no Kessler looking for cracks. Her eyes searched his face for something. Loss? A trap? A reason to retreat? She found none. You're asking me to give up the only claim I ever had, she said quietly. I'm asking you to let go of the bolt so we can check if the threads still hold. The pen hovered. Helena looked at the paper, at the line beside her name, at the space where a signature would make her, legally, no one to him at all. She signed. The ink dried quickly under the lamp's warmth. Daniel took the document, folded it once, and placed it inside his jacket. Then he extended his hand, not to shake, to hold. Helena stared at it. Ruined knuckles, a scar across the second finger from a slipped chisel, grease stains that never quite come clean. She took it. Her grip was careful, unpracticed, honest. Dinner, Daniel said. Friday, my place. Ellie wants to show you her moth collection. Something cracked behind Helena's expression, small, almost invisible, but real. I'll bring Madeleine's, she said. Outside the window, the city pulsed with distant light. Somewhere below, the old freight elevator groaned to life, carrying something heavy toward the ground floor. Daniel didn't let go of her hand, and for the first time in 8 years, the tension between them didn't feel like a fault line. It felt like torque, measured, deliberate, and exactly enough to hold.